The Catholic Church is the oldest and largest Christian institution in the world. It runs hospitals, schools, and charities on every continent. It has guided the spiritual lives of billions of people for 2,000 years. And for decades, possibly centuries, it harbored one of the most widespread institutional cover-ups in human history. We're covering how the abuse scandal began, how the Church systematically covered it up for decades, the Boston Globe investigation that broke it open, the global scale of what was discovered, and what, if anything, has actually changed. Stay with me. The abuse didn't start in Boston. It didn't start in America. And it didn't start in the 20th century. What started in Boston in 2002 was the exposure. For decades, priests in parishes across the world were abusing children in their care. The pattern was almost always the same. A priest would identify a vulnerable child, often from a struggling family, often one who looked up to the church for guidance. He would build trust with the family, then abuse the child. The child, terrified and ashamed, would often say nothing. When they did speak, they were frequently not believed. When complaints reached church leadership, bishops, cardinals, the Vatican, the response was not to involve police. It was to move the priest, transfer him to another parish, another city, another country, where the pattern would begin again with new victims. This wasn't the behavior of a few rogue individuals. This was institutional policy. Documents later obtained through lawsuits showed that church leaders across multiple countries knowingly transferred abusive priests rather than report them. The abuse was a crime. The cover-up was a choice, made deliberately, repeatedly, at the highest levels of the institution, to protect the church's reputation over the safety of children. In 2001, a small team of investigative journalists at the Boston Globe began pulling on a thread that the church had been hiding for decades. What unraveled changed the world. The Spotlight team began investigating allegations against a single priest who had been quietly moved between parishes for decades despite known abuse. As they dug deeper, they realized he was not an exception. He was a pattern. Working through court documents, church records, and interviews with survivors, Spotlight identified 70 priests in the Boston Archdiocese alone who had faced abuse allegations. Cardinal Bernard Law, the head of the Boston Archdiocese, had personally signed transfer letters moving known abusers to new parishes. When the Globe published its findings in January 2002, the response was immediate and global. Survivors who had stayed silent for decades came forward. Similar investigations were launched in cities and countries around the world. What had been an open secret inside the church became the biggest institutional scandal of the 21st century. The Spotlight investigation didn't just expose abuse. It proved the cover-up went all the way to the top and gave survivors around the world the courage to speak. Boston was just the beginning. As investigators around the world followed the Globe's lead, the true scale of the scandal became impossible to ignore. In Ireland, a government commission found that tens of thousands of children had been abused in church-run institutions over decades. In Australia, a royal commission found that 7% of Catholic priests had been accused of abuse between 1950 and 2015. In Pennsylvania, a grand jury report in 2018 identified more than 300 priests who had abused over 1,000 victims over 70 years, and documented how church leaders had systematically concealed it. In Germany, an independent study found at least 3,677 victims of clergy abuse between 1946 and 2014. In France, an independent commission estimated that 330,000 people had been victims of clergy sexual abuse since the 1950s. The abuse wasn't a regional problem or a cultural problem. It was a global institutional problem, enabled by a structure that prioritized secrecy over justice. For decades, the Vatican's official position was that this was a matter for the Church to handle internally. That position became impossible to maintain. Cardinal Bernard Law eventually resigned in 2002 and was quietly given a ceremonial position in Rome, outside the jurisdiction of American courts. Pope Francis issued an apology in 2018, calling the abuse a crime and a sacrilege. He convened a summit of bishops from around the world in 2019 and introduced new Vatican laws requiring bishops to report abuse to church authorities. Critics noted that the laws did not require reporting to civil authorities in countries where that wasn't legally required. The Vatican's response evolved from denial to acknowledgment, but survivors and advocates have consistently said that accountability has fallen far short of justice. After 2 decades of scandal, lawsuits, and resignations, the question remains: has the Catholic Church actually changed? Some things have changed. Many dioceses now have mandatory reporting policies and background checks for clergy. The Church has paid out billions of dollars in settlements to survivors. Estimates range from $4 billion in the US alone to over $10 billion globally. But survivors and advocates point to significant gaps. Most significantly, no senior church official has been criminally prosecuted for covering up abuse in most jurisdictions. The men who signed the transfer letters, who moved abusers from parish to parish, who chose the church's reputation over children's safety, most of them faced no criminal consequences. The Catholic Church has changed its policies. It has not fully reckoned with its past. And for the hundreds of thousands of survivors around the world, policy changes are not the same as justice. 2,000 years of history, billions of faithful followers, hospitals, schools, and charities that have genuinely changed lives, and decades of abuse, cover-up, and institutional silence that have broken thousands of them. The Catholic Church is not defined solely by its scandals, but it cannot be understood without them. If you want more stories like this, click the card above for our breakdown of the O.J. Simpson trial, animated in Lego. See you there.